Louisiana is dismissed, overlooked, known mostly for jazz and hurricanes. Yet at its muddy core, this so-called forgotten state quietly moves more cargo than any place in America, its river ports powering an economy larger than New Zealand. Beneath the cliches, steel giants load grain, oil, and chemicals round the clock, fueled by geography as ruthless as it is generous. This wealth, hidden in plain sight, shapes not just the Gulf, but the fate of an entire nation. Why is nobody talking about the real engine driving America's industrial heart? The answer begins where the river meets the land. From the sky, Louisiana stretches out as a web of shimmering water and green, stitched together by the restless bends of the Mississippi River. Down at the riverbank, the land feels heavy and raw, a place shaped by water's patience and violence. Every year, the river carves its channel deeper, holding a steady 45-foot depth that ocean freighters and barges depend on. This is no accident. The river's pull is relentless, dragging silt from as far north as Minnesota, and then dropping it here in the Delta's slow, muddy embrace. For thousands of years, these currents built up 30,000 square miles of rich bottomland, soil dark as coffee, layered with the memory of ancient floods. The Mississippi's push and pull still defines the ground underfoot. Its shifting channels and annual floods once spread fresh earth across the fields, feeding endless rows of cane and rice. Even now, the land is streaked with veins of clay and sand, constantly renewed by the river's sediment, though not as freely as before. Where wild marsh meets the riverbank, the air is thick with the scent of wet earth and the promise of another season's harvest. Here, the world's busiest ports owe their existence to a natural channel that never sleeps, deep enough for the largest ships, wide enough for whole flotillas to pass. No other state can claim a river like this, a living artery that makes exporting grain, coal, and ore as effortless as the tide. The raw geography, a gift of depth, reach, and fertile soil, set the stage for everything that followed. Steel rails and highways now run alongside the Mississippi, tracing the same path as the river's barges. Here, the river is more than a boundary. It is a moving conveyor belt, carrying the weight of a nation's harvest. Grain, coal, and chemicals flow south by the thousands of tons, loaded onto barges that drift with the current. Each barge tow can haul as much as 70 trucks or 16 freight cars, and do so at a fraction of the cost. On this water, a single ton can travel a mile for just a penny or two, 10 times cheaper than rail, and 15 times less than trucking. That margin is the quiet advantage that keeps Louisiana's docks humming, even when global prices squeeze everyone else. At the river's edge, the landscape bristles with rail junctions and concrete ramps. Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern lines snake toward the wharves, feeding the grain elevators and tank farms that line the levee. Interstate corridors like Interstate 10 and Interstate 12 stretch out like spokes from the river, funneling freight from Texas, the Midwest, and the Atlantic coast straight to the port gates. Trucks and trains bring the cargo in. Barges and ships carry it out. Every mile of road and rail laid here multiplies the reach of the river, binding Louisiana's ports to the heartland and the world beyond. Standing on the dock, the port director puts it plainly. We move more tonnage than Rotterdam because we bet on the river's endless flow. Dredging was our moonshot. In this world, logistics is destiny. The river's natural channel, now overlaid with steel and asphalt, makes Louisiana not just a crossroads, but a launchpad for American industry. Hammers rang out over the river as dawn broke, echoing across what had been marsh and cane fields only months before. In the spring of 1942, the banks of the Mississippi turned into a hive of steel and sweat. Shipyards rose almost overnight, their skeletons of scaffolding and cranes crowding the skyline, each one hungry for more hands. Welders and riveters worked in shifts around the clock, their torches throwing sparks into the humid air. The pace was relentless. At Higgins Industries, the foreman kept a stopwatch on his belt and a tally on the wall. He liked to say, "We don't measure days, we measure hulls." At the peak, a new ship slid down the ways every 3 days, the champagne barely dry on the last bow before the next was ready. The transformation was total. Wetlands gave way to concrete slipways and warehouses stacked with steel plates, barrels of paint, and crates of rivets by the million. Even the old-timers who remembered the river's slow seasons marveled at the change. There was no room for idleness. Every hand, from farm boy to city mechanic, found a place in the surge. The air shook with the racket of pneumatic hammers, the clang of steel on steel, and the deep thud of hulls hitting water. Each launch drew a crowd, families, workers, soldiers cheering as another vessel joined the endless convoy steaming toward war. In those months, the riverbank was a living engine, its rhythm set by the next hull rolling down the rails, the next bottle smashed, the next set of hands ready for another shift. Long after the last ship slid into the river, the work never stopped. Crowds of men and women poured into Louisiana's booming towns, drawn by the promise of steady pay and the glow of refinery towers lighting up the night. The war had left behind more than empty slipways. It seeded a new kind of industry along the river's edge. In St. James Parish, 1947 saw the first ethylene cracker fire up, a gleaming maze of pipes and towers that turned oil and gas into the basic building blocks of modern life. Plant after plant followed, stretching from Baton Rouge to New Orleans, each one feeding the next in a chain that would come to be known as the Chemical Corridor. The jobs were tough, the hours long, but the rewards were real. For the first time, contracts hammered out by union representatives guaranteed not just a wage, but a future, health insurance, overtime, safety rules that meant you came home with all your fingers. Old-timers remember the day the union signed the first statewide safety agreement. One remembers that day. We went from cane knives to control panels, and we fought for every raise. By the 50s, the plants were as permanent as the levees, their stacks flaring orange against the dusk. Wages lifted whole towns, from riverbank shacks to brick houses with new Chevys in the driveway. The corridor's workers, black, white, new arrivals from Texas and Arkansas, carried lunch pails past gates guarded by Union cards, their sweat building a prosperity that would outlast the war. Where once there were only fields and marsh, now stood a living engine of American industry. Louisiana's economic engine hums on a scale that defies its reputation. Salt air and the smell of oil, rust on steel, the constant clank of machinery, and the low rumble of barges under the bridges. The state's annual output now tops $280 billion, greater than the entire economy of New Zealand, and nearly matching countries like Norway before the oil age. This is not small-town commerce. This is massive industry concentrated along rivers, ports, and refineries. Exports alone soared past $60 billion last year, with outbound shipments of chemicals, petroleum, and grain flowing down the arteries of the Mississippi and out to the world. These flows are measured in tons, in containers, in the steady procession of vessels that never seem to stop. These numbers are not just impressive. They are industrial in the truest sense, placing Louisiana in the company of global players. According to Lauren Scott, an economist at Louisiana State University, Louisiana's economy is hidden in plain sight, massive refineries and barges, but the story sold is shrimp and jazz. The reality is measured in the weight of cargo, the value of contracts, and the sheer volume of trade that moves through its ports. The dollars tell only part of the story. Behind them, an industrial volume that few states or even nations can rival. What happens next matters for more than one state. Can this region sustain that scale, adapt to new markets, and keep the engines of American industry running for the next generation? Steel coils, grain, and oil barrels pour through Louisiana's ports in volumes that stagger the imagination. 530 million tons of cargo pass through the Port of South Louisiana each year, more than any other port in the Western Hemisphere. Here, the scale is measured not in containers, but in mountains of raw material and rivers of fuel. Refineries along the river process 2,700,000 barrels of oil every single day, their stacks and pipes stretching for miles, feeding the nation's hunger for gasoline, plastics, and jet fuel. 40% of America's petrochemicals are born in this corridor, from the ethylene that makes plastic bottles to the ammonia that fertilizes fields across the Midwest. In the words of one economic development official, our ports don't just move goods, they move economies. The numbers become real when seen in motion, endless trains of tank cars, convoys of barges, and the ceaseless thunder of engines loading and unloading, day and night. This is the physical heartbeat of American industry, loud, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Right now, Louisiana's ports move more cargo than any other state, anchoring America's economy in ways few notice. As energy shifts and climate threats rise, the nation's future depends on places overlooked. Sometimes the power behind prosperity hides where we least expect. What else are we missing?